Pokemon Gold and Silver are among some of my favorite Pokemon games, which isn't a big surprise given the fact that Silver version was the first Pokemon game that I owned. I played and replayed that game dozens of times, which may explain why I made those videos about the gym battles against Whitney and Claire. And to be completely honest, I very much fell into the stereotype of kids that played the game by overleveling their starter and having 5 sacrificial pawns on the team that would let me heal my starter when needed. Every time I played the game, I would always pick either Cyndaquil or Totodile as my starter Pokemon. Cyndaquil is my favorite starter of all time, while Totodile is definitely in the top half at least. But as a kid, I never chose Chikorita as my starter. For the past 26 years since the release of Gold and Silver, Chikorita has gotten a bad reputation, widely considered to be among the worst starter Pokemon, and a horrible choice for a starter in its native Johto region. And when comparing Chikorita to its fellow Johto starters, I can understand why people feel this way. Typhlosion, being a fire type with a high special attack stat, can one-shot a lot of enemies in the game with Flame Wheel or Thunder Punch, while Feraligatr as a water type gets access to an early Surf that can do a lot of damage despite its low special attack stat, and has a wide move pool to let it easily damage most enemies. But Meganium isn't known for getting one-hit KOs in most situations, and has some bad matchups as a grass-type Pokemon in Johto, and I think that this is the real reason why people undervalue Chikorita. But today I'll prove that Chikorita is actually a great choice as a starter in the Johto region. To do so, I played a run of Crystal version using Chikorita as my starter Pokemon, showing that Chikorita is a viable choice as your starter when playing the Gen 2 games. So let's take a look at this Chikorita run and discuss why I think Chikorita is underrated as a starter Pokemon in these games. Let's start off by briefly discussing Meganium's stats. Unlike Typhlosion, who has a high special attack stat, or Feraligatr, which has a high physical attack stat, Meganium is a Pokemon that instead has high defense and special defense stats, with both of its defensive stats being at a base of 100. These defenses, alongside a base HP of 80, make Meganium a pretty bulky Pokemon overall, allowing it to survive even most super effective hits in the game. However, Meganium focusing on defense doesn't mean that its speed and offensive stats are low. On the contrary, a base speed of 80 is usually fast enough to let you outspeed the majority of opponents in the game, and Meganium's base attack and special attack stats of 82 and 83 respectively are pretty good too. With these stats, Meganium is 1 base speed point behind Gyarados, and nearly has the same attack stat as Steelix. So while not the most impressive, Meganium does have some fairly good offensive stats overall. The real issue with Meganium being a more defensively oriented Pokemon in my opinion is the fact that Meganium's typing isn't the greatest for defense. As a pure grass type Pokemon, Meganium has 5 total weaknesses, almost all of which appear at some point in Johto. Meganium is weak to Flying, Bug, Ice, Poison, and Fire. The first 3 of those types are the type specialties of gym leaders in the Johto region, whereas Poison typing is both a common type used among Team Rocket members and is used by Koga in the Elite Four. This, however, isn't a Meganium specific issue, but rather a grass type issue in general. However, there's one other issue for Chikorita. It lacks reliable recovery options to pair with its defensive nature. While Chikorita does learn Synthesis by level up, this move isn't that great in Gold Silver Crystal, as it only heals for 1/3 of your max HP unless it's used on their sunny day, and only has 5 power points. And for whatever reason, Game Freak simply decided that Chikorita shouldn't learn Leech Seed by level up, and can only get access to that move via breeding. We'll get back to that one in a second. Offensively, Chikorita does get some great moves that you'll want to use. For Grass Stab, it only gets Razor Leaf, which sounds bad and admittedly isn't that great, but the same goes for Bulbasaur in both Red, Blue, Yellow, and Fire Red Leaf Green, so it's not like this is the worst thing in the world. Importantly, Chikorita also gets access to Body Slam by level up. This gives you access to a move that is not only helpful for dealing damage that isn't as easily resisted as Grass type moves, but also has a 30% chance to cause paralysis. And lastly, Meganium is actually a great option for the Earthquake TM that you'll find in Victory Road, though you of course won't have access to that move until you're up to that point. As it turns out though, Chikorita gets access to some extremely useful support moves, learning both Reflect and Light Screen by level up, with the prior being available extremely early on at level 12. With these moves, Meganium doesn't actually need to be the one directly fighting opponents. Instead, you can choose to set up Reflect or Light Screen and switch into a teammate that will be doing the majority of the battling instead. But let's get back to discussing Leech Seed. While it's not a level up move for Chikorita, as I mentioned, it can still learn Leech Seed as an egg move, and as it turns out, you can get a Chikorita with Leech Seed as soon as you get access to the daycare right before you get to Goldenrod City. I'll admit, this is a lot of work, and isn't a way that most people would play the game. But with its natural bulk and access to dual screens, Leech Seed is one of the best possible moves to have on Chikorita. In order to get Leech Seed onto Chikorita, you'll first have to play the beginning of the game with a female Chikorita. This can be a bit tedious given its mere 1 in 8 chance of being female, but in this run I got a bit lucky and got a female Chikorita on my second attempt. Once you get access to Headbutt in the Ilex Forest, you'll want to use that move to find and catch a male Execute who learns Leech Seed at level 13. Then by placing Execute and Chikorita in the daycare together, you'll get a Chikorita that has the move Leech Seed on it. This will make a lot of battles so much easier since Leech Seed will both deal some chip damage to enemies and give you some passive healing to keep your HP up. That being said, it's still not possible for Chikorita to fight its way through the entire game on its own, disregarding some extreme overleveling. While many of us were able to brute force our way through the Gen 2 games with just a slightly overleveled Typhlosion or Feraligatr, this isn't how Pokemon games are intended to be played. The whole point of having access to 6 Pokemon on your team is to create a team of Pokemon that you like who can all help cover each other's weaknesses. And as it turns out, it's actually pretty easy to find teammates that can help Chikorita get through the game. For starters, an excellent option to support Chikorita defensively is Geodude, which you can find at the start of the game in the Dark Cave. With its Rock Ground typing, Geodude resists the Fire, Flying, and Poison type moves that Chikorita is weak to, and can hit every type that Chikorita is weak to super effectively. Geodude should be your crutch in the early game, helping you get past the first 2 gym battles. The second teammate that I decided to use in this run is admittedly a bit unfair to mention, since Kadabra is possibly the single best Pokemon that you can use in GSC. Since Fire, Ice, and Electric type moves were all special moves in these games, and Abra gets access to Fire, Ice, and Thunder Punch by TM, yeah, Kadabra has the ability to sweep through the entire game on its own. That being said, any Psychic type Pokemon can be an effective teammate when you're using Chikorita as your starter, since Psychic types are extremely helpful against the plentiful Poison types in the game that Graveler won't always be able to handle on its own. Lastly, having access to Ice type moves is also valuable in the Johto region, seeing as there's a Dragon type gym leader as well as a Dragon type champion. While a Pokemon like Jinx can be great as an Ice type for the team, I decided to catch Lapras in this run instead for 3 reasons. First, it's Lapras. Why wouldn't I want to catch it in GSC? Secondly, Lapras is one of the few Pokemon that gets access to Ice Beam by level up in GSC, which is extremely important since there was no Ice Beam TM in those games, and it's an annoying move to learn via Move Tutor and Crystal version only. And lastly, Lapras is also a bulky Pokemon, giving you a strong defensive core with Meganium, Graveler, and Lapras together. With just these 4 Pokemon, I was able to get through every major battle in the game without any issues. I also did try to use Chikorita as much as possible, and relied on the other Pokemon only when I felt that it was absolutely necessary. This team had enough type coverage to let me handle pretty much every opponent in the game, especially since Kadabra has access to all of those elemental punches. So with my team selection explained, let's take a look at how I made my way through each of the major battles in the game. We're of course starting off with Falkner, the flying type expert. At first, you might assume that Chikorita wasn't used in this battle at all, and that I solely relied on Geodude here. However, you'd actually be wrong, as Chikorita was an important part of my strategy in this battle. The annoying thing about Falkner isn't the fact that he has an evolved Pokemon at level 9, it's the fact that his Pidgeotto has Mud Slap, which hits Geodude super effectively and lowers its accuracy. It's not good for a rock type using Rock Throw to have its accuracy lowered. To defeat Falkner, I constantly swapped between Geodude and Chikorita, letting Geodude tank Gust while Chikorita tanked Mud Slap, keeping Geodude's accuracy intact. I did make a mistake in this battle, namely not giving Geodude a berry to hold, but ultimately it didn't matter. Once Pidgeotto used up all 10 of its Mud Slaps, I was able to use Geodude to easily finish off the battle. Shortly afterwards, Geodude of course completely soloed Bugsy, though I could have used Chikorita for Reflect in this battle if I had wanted to. Next up is the second rival battle, which is probably the most difficult one. However, since his team consists of Ghastly before abilities existed, Zubat, and Quilava, Geodude had a type advantage against all of his Pokemon. After that is the real test, Whitney. I won't lie, I got a bit unlucky in this battle. I have an entire video discussing Miltank and why I think that the battle against it is the toughest one in GSC, but man, that Clefairy can be an RNG nightmare with Metronome. It got a turn 1 Sacred Fire against my Chikorita right after I missed my first Leech Seed. RNG is a bitch sometimes. Still, just getting up a Leech Seed was enough to help both Bayleaf and Geodude survive the battle. It wasn't perfect, but I wasn't going for perfection here. I'm just trying to prove a point. Next up is Morty, and I hate to say it, but you really shouldn't be using Bayleaf here. Since his entire team has dual Ghost Poison typing, they're all immune to Chikorita's normal type moves and resist its Razor Leaf. Sure, Leech Seed can be a bit helpful, and Reflect can lower the damage from Shadow Ball in this generation, but you're better off using your Psychic type of choice in this gym. Chuck, on the other hand, is fodder for Bayleaf. You just need to keep Bayleaf healthy with Leech Seed and Synthesis against his Primeape, and hit his Poliwrath with a few super effective Razor Leafs. Normally I would battle Jasmine next, but in this run I went for Price instead since his Pokemon are at a lower level. And I'm glad I did this because the battle against Price is probably the most interesting one for Chikorita, as you have an important decision to make here. Should you play by hardcore Nuzlocke rules and keep your Bayleaf at level 31 to match his Ace Piloswine, or should you get it to level 32 instead so you can have access to Meganium? Using Bayleaf in this battle is the textbook definition of a double-edged sword. Looking at Price's team, we see that he has a Seal, a Dugong, and his Piloswine. That's 2 water types and a ground type, meaning that all of his Pokemon are actually weak to grass type moves. However, Bayleaf will also take super effective damage from the Icy Winds and Aurora Beams that his Pokemon will be throwing back at you, since it's very unlikely that Bayleaf will be able to one-shot any of Price's Pokemon. Things are vastly different here for Meganium, however. With its increased stats, Meganium can now one-hit KO Seal, immediately making this battle easier. It can also potentially one-hit KO Dugong with a crit from Razor Leaf, while Dugong's Aurora Beam isn't really threatening a KO back even with a crit of its own. And of course, with its laughably low special attack stat, Piloswine isn't much of a threat to Meganium either. Basically, Meganium is more than capable of handling Price on its own, though Bayleaf may struggle here. Back to Jasmine now, where I have to say it's actually her Magnemites that are the problem. Since they're half Steel type, they resist both the Grass and Normal type moves that Meganium will have access to, and they can both cause paralysis with Thunder Wave. Your best bet here is to of course throw your Graveler at the problem instead. Or, if you want to be an idiot like me, you can also teach your Meganium Mud Slap. I did that because I thought it was going to be funny, okay? As for Steelix, Meganium actually isn't bad against it, as its Steel ground typing means that Razor Leaf will actually hit neutrally. And of course, Leech Seed for recovery and Reflect to lower physical damage are both great options against Steelix as well. Iron Tail can do quite a bit of damage, it being a 100 base power move that gets stabbed and all that, but it also has less accuracy than the infamously inaccurate Stone Mist, so you don't need to worry about that too much. Though if you are worried about it, you can always choose to use Kadabra with Fire Punch or a water type Pokemon against Steelix instead. And last up, of course, is Claire. Now, I actually discussed the battle against Claire in this video, which is where I first mentioned using Meganium with Leech Seed. This is where having an Ice type, or Kadabra with Ice Punch, comes in clutch, since Ice type moves will obliterate her 3 Dragonair. In this run, I did in fact simply one-hit KO all of them with Lapras's Ice Beam. The real challenge, of course, is Claire's Kingdra, but this is a favorable matchup for Meganium as well. It can of course resist Surf, and with its natural bulk, it'll easily survive a Hyper Beam from Kingdra. Even Smokescreen isn't that annoying to deal with, so long as you get off a Leech Seed first, since that makes it much easier for Meganium to win the battle by staying healthy. Despite getting hit by a Smokescreen in this battle, I was able to take an easy win over Kingdra with Leech Seed and a Paralysis from Body Slam. So overall, Chikorita and its evolutions are capable of finding value in all 8 of the gyms in the region, whether it be through doing the battling itself, or by using Leech Seed, Reflect, or Light Screen to support its teammates. But we're not quite done yet, as we still need to see how Meganium matches up against the Elite Four. And spoiler alert, Meganium is a monster for this Pokemon League. Well, maybe not against Will. The thing about Will is that he has some Pokemon that aren't exactly friendly to grass types, namely his 2 Xatu and his Jinx. Though to be fair, his Xatu don't actually have flying type moves, so it's not like they threaten Meganium with super effective damage. Still, I decided to keep Meganium behind for the majority of this battle, only sending it out against Will's Slowbro. That isn't to say that you can't use Meganium here, as Light Screen would make this battle infinitely easier. But at the end of the day, I felt that Meganium was actually having some 4 move slot syndrome, and I valued having Reflect over Light Screen for the other Elite Four battles instead. Koga may be a bit surprising though, since on paper, Meganium should struggle against him, seeing as he's a poison type specialist. Kind of. Koga is actually more of a status and evasion expert, who just so happens to have 4 poison type Pokemon on his team. Now sure, you can just send out Kadabra with Fire Punch to obliterate his team, like you just pulled out Exodia against him, but that's not the point of this video. So let's see how Meganium did against Koga's Pokemon. One of them, Crobat, is a Pokemon that Meganium really can't do much against. There's also Fortress, which has a Bug Steel type that won't be taking much damage from Meganium either, but as I mentioned earlier, you can teach Earthquake to Meganium once you find its TM in Victory Road. Having access to this move makes Koga a bit easier for Meganium, as it can at least 2-hit KO his Ariados, Muck, and Venomoth, while not being too badly threatened by any of them back. I mean, his Muck does have Sludge Bomb, but I don't think I've ever seen that thing not go for Minimize on turn 1. Third up is Bruno, and I'm gonna make this one quick since normally we don't talk about Bruno. Ah crap, here come the copyright strikes. I'll be real here, Meganium can single-handedly take on his entire team, with the Reflect and Leech Seed combo going crazy in this battle. Hitmontop and Hitmonlee barely do any damage to Meganium even before Reflect is up. Hitmonchan using Fire or Ice Punch is just pathetic, coming from its base 35 special attack stat, and Onix is an Onix. Machamp is the only potential threat on his team, since its Cross Chop is a powerful move with a high crit rate, which means that it can ignore the defense boost you get from Reflect. But yeah, Bruno is kind of a complete pushover for Meganium. And finally, we have Karen. Once again, you may think that Meganium shouldn't be used here, but you would once again be wrong. Leech Seed is still pretty good against bulky Pokemon such as her starting Umbreon. Meanwhile, Earthquake can help take on Vileplume, though you should be wary of its Stun Spore, which I luckily dodged. Earthquake is also a 1-hit KO against Gengar, thanks again to the lack of abilities in this game. And despite my initial assumptions, Meganium can actually defeat Houndoom in a 1-on-1 battle as well, since Earthquake is a 2-hit KO without a crit, and Flamethrower won't OHKO back unless it crits either. I really didn't expect that one to go so well. Still, Murkrow can be an issue, especially if you don't have Body Slam in your move pool anymore, which I didn't at this point in the run. But now, we've made it to the championship battle against Lance, and yeah, I'll be honest, Meganium won't be doing anything here, especially since at this point, the only offensive moves I had on it were Razor Leaf and Earthquake. Lance is actually more of a flying type trainer in this game, with all 6 of his team members being flying type Pokemon. I guess you can maybe set up Reflect against Gyarados, or maybe the level 47 Dragonite that has Thunder, but that's about it. His 2 other Dragonites have Fire Blast and Blizzard, and his last 2 Pokemon are Aerodactyl and Charizard, both of which have Stab Wing Attack. So yeah, Meganium does falter at the end here. Except, as we all know, Lance isn't the end of the 2nd generation. Once we become Johto champion, we get to travel through Kanto to take on the gym leaders from that region, and this is where Meganium truly begins to shine. While Meganium wasn't always able to take on the Johto gyms by itself, it's more than capable of tackling several Kanto gyms without any support whatsoever. In fact, Meganium is more than capable of completely wiping a gym all on its own, not even a minute after you've set foot into Kanto. Since you enter Kanto through Vermilion City for the post-game, it makes sense to take on Lieutenant Surge first. And seeing as Surge has only Electric-type Pokemon, and Meganium should still know Earthquake after using it against the Elite Four, Meganium can wipe out all of his Pokemon in a single hit. Though, to be fair, a lot of Kanto's gym leaders were made a bit easier to beat than they should have been, thanks to the levels of their Pokemon being lower than the levels of Lance's Pokemon in the champion battle. After accidentally bringing down Surge's gym, I decided to do the rest of the Kanto gyms in increasing level order. So this means that Janine was my next target, seeing as she has Pokemon whose levels are in the 30s. Along the way I also caught Snorlax, who can be another great addition to this bulky team. Now due to that low level cap, Janine is pretty easy to defeat with Meganium. I used Lapras to handle Crobat, though Meganium can do so as well if it still has Body Slam. As for the rest of her team, Earthquake is at least a 2-hit KO on all of her Pokemon, and is basically a guaranteed 1-hit KO against her 2 Weezing thanks to their low levels. Next up by level order is Brock. Let's see here. Graveler, Kabutops, Onix, Rhyhorn, and Omastar. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that makes 5 Pokemon that are all 4 times weak to grass. So moving on to Erica. Now I actually didn't use Meganium in this battle since the battle was free with Kadabra, and with my move pool Meganium wasn't going to be helpful here since it only had Razor Leaf and Earthquake for damage. That being said, if I had kept Body Slam on Meganium at this point, it could have taken on Erica well enough. After Erica would be Misty, the Water type expert, which of course means that this is another easy one for Meganium. That being said, it is possible for the battle to go poorly if she uses Blizzard with Lapras or Ice Beam with Starmie, the latter of which did do quite a bit of damage to Meganium since Razor Leaf didn't pick up the immediate KO on it. I do also want to point out, however, that you can teach Meganium Giga Drain after you beat Erica, but I didn't do so due to Giga Drain having only 5 power points in this game. The next gym leader to take on would be Sabrina. Meganium can do pretty well in this battle thanks to its bulk, letting it take on Espeon by itself. Meganium was also able to take down Mr. Mime, but by that point its HP was down in the red, and I decided to see how much damage an Earthquake would do to Alakazam. And I've gotta say, I'm a bit surprised that it didn't get the KO, but that's still some great damage. Honestly, I think that if I had Light Screen instead of Reflect at this point, Meganium may have been able to take on Sabrina by itself. With just 2 gym leaders left to face, I next made my way to the Seafoam Islands to battle against Blaine, and this one has to be a bad matchup for Meganium, right? There's no way Meganium could take on fire types. Well, when one of those fire types is actually Fire Rock and 4 times weak to Earthquake, yeah, Magcargo makes Meganium useful in this battle because of how badly it sucks. Then again, Earthquake was actually a 1-hit KO against all of Blaine's Pokemon. Meganium truly is an incredible starter to have in the Kanto region. This leaves the battle against Green. No, I don't call him Blue, his name is originally Green, as in the original games were red and green. Feel free to give me shit for that in the comments, because the more comments this video gets, the better it'll do in the algorithm. Anyways, Green is the only Kanto gym that can be threatening to Meganium, thanks to the large jump in levels on his team and the various types of Pokemon that he has. Fortunately, my viewers were there to remind me that Oddish can carry this battle instead. The big threats to Meganium on Green's team are Pidgeot and Arcanine, both of whom can deal a lot of damage to Meganium with super effective moves, but can be handled with its teammates. Your Ice type should be able to handle Pidgeot, and Graveler would have had a field day against Arcanine if I had actually brought him with me to this battle. And of course, my Meganium couldn't take on Executor either since it's immune to Leech Seed and resists both Razor Leaf and Earthquake. As for the rest of Green's team, Meganium can battle Alakazam if you're running Light Screen, Gyarados is easy to take on if you still have Reflect, and Rhydon is of course an easy one-shot with Razor Leaf. So perhaps unexpectedly, Meganium does in fact take on Kanto extremely well, though I guess this does make sense since Meganium does have type advantage over Brock and Misty and can easily take on Surge, Janine, and Blaine with Earthquake coverage. This, however, leads us into the end of the game and the battle against the GOAT himself. So, how well does Meganium match up against all 3 of Kanto's starters at once? Well, first off, we need to take on Red's Pikachu, which I'm having Surge flashbacks. While you can use Graveler to handle Pikachu, Meganium is also more than capable of getting the 1-hit KO against it with Earthquake. Meganium is also able to take on Espeon on its own, though Espeon using Reflect is a bit annoying. Espeon would also be easier to take on if Meganium has Light Screen, though you can also just use Snorlax against it as well, since Snorlax can learn Shadow Ball for super effective coverage and has enough special defense to tank Psychic. Interestingly enough, while recording this battle, which I did do twice, I noticed that Red would send out Venusaur against Meganium instead of using Charizard. I don't really understand that decision, since the only damaging moves on Venusaur are Giga Drain and Solar Beam, both of which do basically nothing to Meganium, who can of course fight back with Earthquake. That being said, Red will of course eventually send Charizard out against Meganium, and at that point, even if you have Body Slam, you should switch out. Graveler can definitely handle Charizard, but critically it cannot switch in on a Flamethrower due to its low special defense. But if you sacrifice an Onion to the Fire Dragon, you can get a safe switch that lets Graveler take out Charizard with a single Rock Throw. And then there's the two Pokemon that Meganium excels against, Snorlax and Blastoise. Due to its massive HP stat, Leech Seed is overpowered against Snorlax, as the amount of HP that the move steals each turn is pretty high. Combining Leech Seed and Reflect with Leftovers makes Meganium all but invincible against Snorlax, though you still have to be wary of potential paralysis from Body Slam. And it's also worth noting that I think Snorlax will always go for Amnesia on turn 1, as evidenced by it doing so when I had my Snorlax out on the field instead of Meganium. Blastoise is also relatively easy, with the only way for it to threaten Meganium being a 70% accurate Blizzard, which won't even be enough to KO if it hits, and who is weak to your choice of either Razor Leaf or Giga Drain. Blastoise is considerably more difficult to defeat if Snorlax has left Meganium paralyzed, but even then, it's just an RNG fight between you getting fully paralyzed and Blastoise missing its Blizzards or just going for Rain Dance instead. And with that, we can officially say that Meganium as a starter is more than capable of not only defeating both the Johto and Kanto gym leaders and the Pokemon League, but also of being more than valuable in the final battle against Red himself. Meganium truly is an exceptional starter Pokemon in GSC, and in my opinion is strongly underestimated. If trained properly, Meganium has all the tools that it needs to be an extremely useful Pokemon in these games. That being said, I do acknowledge that getting a second Chikorita via breeding to get Leech Seed on it is a lot of work, and if you believe that doing so means that Chikorita isn't truly your starter Pokemon, then I can accept those beliefs. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel for some more Pokemon content. I plan on doing some more casual runs of Pokemon games in the future, and have several ideas about topics that can be discussed relating to this series. And if this video has convinced you to play GSC using Chikorita, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about other players having success using Chica as their starter, and I'm curious as to which other Pokemon you would want to pair her up with. On the other hand, if you disagree with me and still think that Chikorita is a terrible starter, feel free to explain why in the comments as well. I'm always open to discussion on these opinion-based topics, so long as the comments are kept civil. And as always, thanks for watching.